They shattered my son's body because they mistook a teenager's parking spot for a felony, and they thought I'd sit still for it. That's the part that still makes me laugh. Like I was gonna watch my kid get folded in half by a bunch of HOA mall cops and just mow my lawn like nothing happened. What they didn't know, what they really didn't know, was that I'd spent 15 years as a federal prosecutor, locking up cartel bosses and political wolves dressed like sheep. I've cross-examined hitmen more polite than the security guards at Maple Hollow. So yeah, when they sent my son to the ICU with 28 broken bones, I didn't call a lawyer. I became one. Again. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments because what I'm about to tell you might just save your neighborhood. This isn't just a story. It's a manual on how to crush small-time tyrants who hide behind lawn rules and fake badges. I still remember the day we moved into Maple Hollow. The realtor was all smiles and highlighter pens, going on about top-tier private security and community togetherness, like she was selling a gated utopia instead of a slow-motion ambush. Dana was sold the moment she saw the park. Jordan, the pool. Me, I just wanted peace. What we got instead was a homeowners association with delusions of grandeur and enough legal gray area to run their own shadow government. And brother, did they run it. We moved to Maple Hollow Reserve for peace. My wife Dana wanted to garden without stray bullets flying over the fence. My son Jordan fell in love with the Olympic pool. Me, I wanted silence. After 15 years of chasing organized crime, I craved boring. HOA brochures promised community integrity, enhanced safety, and neighborhood prestige. What we got was a country club with paranoia issues and enough bylaws to make Stalin blood. It started with charm, smiles, welcome baskets. Then came the fees. $300 0 cents a month turned into $450 0 cents for improved security. I should have smelled it sooner. My whole career was spotting wolves in linen. Linda Prentice ran the HOA like it was her second job, and judging by her attitude, she was angling for a third. Early 60s, hair like a senator's wife, voice like sweet tea with a splash of battery acid. She greeted us on day one like she'd already read my tax returns. We take community standards seriously here, she told me, flashing a smile that didn't reach her crow's feet. Next thing I know, Jordan gets fined $500 for parking on the curb for 20 minutes. Not overnight, not blocking anyone, just parked, engine off, because Dana needed the driveway clear to unload groceries. And suddenly, he's an enemy of the state. I tried to stay calm. I really did. I told myself, don't make this a thing, Carl. You're retired. But when your kid walks into your home office waving a citation and asking if a parking ticket can ruin his college future, something in your chest snaps. I told Jordan to avoid the HOA people till I got back from a quick trip to DC for a security consultation. That was my mistake. While I was gone, they jumped him, broke him. Sent my wife into a trauma spiral and me into a war I didn't ask for, but sure as hell planned to finish. So if you're watching this and thinking, it can't be that bad, it is. And if you're living somewhere with a lady named Linda who carries a clipboard like it's a badge, move. Or stay and fight. I chose the second option. And over the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly how I went from garden variety neighbor to full-blown RICO case against the people who claimed they just wanted cleaner sidewalks and respectful parking. Stay with me, because this HOA didn't know who they were messing with. It started with a fine. Not a warning, not a chat on the porch, just a crisp envelope stuck to our front door like a passive-aggressive billboard. Jordan had parked on the street for 20 minutes. 20, while Dana was unloading groceries. The HOA slapped us with a $500 0 cents violation notice for unauthorized street obstruction and, get this, behavior unbecoming of a Maple Hollow resident. I've seen mobsters write nicer letters. Jordan was furious, understandably. He stormed into my office holding the paper like it had personally insulted his GPA. "Dad, am I really getting extorted on my own curb?" he asked. That was the moment I felt it, a flicker of my old courtroom reflex waking up from retirement. And yet, I brushed it off. Big mistake. one I wouldn't see clearly until it was almost too late. The next day, the real threat came. An anonymous email landed in my inbox. No greeting, no signature, just one line. Your son needs to learn respect. Athletic scholarships can disappear with one bad incident report. Apologies accepted to 4:00 p.m. daily. I reread it twice, then once more, slowly letting the acid behind those words burn through any doubt. This wasn't HOA business anymore. This was calculated intimidation. I showed Jordan. He went pale. "They can't do that, right?" he asked, trying to sound calm. I gave the only answer I could manage. Not legally. But legality didn't seem to mean much in this neighborhood anymore. And instead of pulling him closer, I told him to keep his head down while I flew to D.C. for a short consulting job. That was my last mistake, and the one I'll regret for the rest of my life. 2 days later, I was in a conference room reviewing counterterrorism policy when my phone rang. It was St. Mary's Hospital. My son had been admitted. 28 fractures, internal bleeding, multiple surgeries expected. I dropped everything. On the phone, the attending physician, Dr. Naomi Vargas, delivered the facts with surgical precision, but I could hear the undertow of disbelief in her voice. "Mr. Ellison," she said, "these injuries are not consistent with an accident or a schoolyard fight. This was a deliberate, repeated assault." Jordan had walked into the HOA office to protest the fine. According to the nurse's notes, that's where the so-called security team cornered him. They didn't subdue him. They stomped him. While I was briefing professionals on threat assessment in Washington, my son was being treated like a threat back home. I landed 8 hours later. Dana was in the waiting room, her eyes red and voice hollow. She didn't say hi. She just held up her phone with a photo. Jordan's body, covered in bruises, limbs in casts, a breathing tube down his throat, his face swollen beyond recognition. I'd seen cartel torture victims with less damage. Dana whispered, "They said he attacked them first." I felt the temperature in my blood drop below freezing. The HOA called it self-defense, said the cameras malfunctioned, claimed there were no witnesses. Convenient, isn't it? All the systems that worked flawlessly when they issued citations for uncut grass suddenly forgot how to function when a teenager was brutalized in their lobby. I'd put drug lords behind bars with fewer tells. And now I was looking at the most personal case of my life. That night, Dr. Vargas brought me into her office. She didn't sugarcoat. "I've worked in trauma medicine for 15 years, she said. "I've seen blunt force, defensive wounds, systematic fractures. This was organized, targeted, coordinated." She pulled up x-rays like she was building a timeline of the violence. Defensive breaks in the wrists, spiral fractures in the fingers, boot perpetual bruises on the thighs and ribs. "Your son didn't get in a scuffle," she said. "He was restrained and beaten." I asked if she would testify. She didn't hesitate. "Already logged in the official report," she said, "and yes, I'll stand behind it in court." Her clarity gave me a brief sense of control, a signal fire in the fog, but it also made one thing devastatingly clear. Jordan wasn't a casualty. He was a target, and I had just declared war without realizing I'd walked onto a battlefield already wired for detonation. So here we are. Jordan's in a hospital bed, Dana's barely sleeping, and I'm staring down a homeowners association that thinks it's above the law because they've dressed themselves in uniforms and soaked themselves in silence. But silence doesn't scare me. I spent years dragging secrets into sunlight, and if these people wanted a quiet cover-up, they picked the wrong family. Stay with me. Because what happened next, it cracked the whole machine wide open, and not just for us, but for every single neighbor they'd silenced before. When I walked back into my house after the hospital, something in me had shifted. I didn't just see walls and furniture. I saw angles, cover, entry points. It was the prosecutor's lens, and it hadn't left me, even after retirement. I wasn't a dad anymore. I was evidence gathering on behalf of a victim, and that victim happened to be my son. That's a whole different kind of fuel. I pulled my old legal notebooks from storage, flipped through case strategies like they were recipes for justice. You don't spend 15 years chasing criminal empires without learning how to build one thing real tight. A case so airtight it makes rats confess. And if these people thought they could hide behind neighborhood bylaws and fake badges, they were about to find out what due process smells like. First call I made was to Rico Montoya, private investigator, former DHS, a man whose Google history probably puts him on every watch list, and I mean that as a compliment. He showed up looking like retirement didn't quite stick to him either. When I told him what happened to Jordan, he didn't flinch. Just pulled out a small notebook and said, "Start with names." Within 48 hours, Rico sent me a file on Travis Holt, the HOA's security chief. Holt had been terminated from the Riverside Police Department for, you guessed it, excessive force, civilian complaints, settled lawsuits. And yet, here he was, in a private security uniform, playing cop in a cul-de-sac with no accountability. His crew? All ex-law enforcement washouts. Guys who couldn't cut it under real scrutiny, so they put on discount badges and handed out fear like HOA flyers. The neighborhood wasn't being protected, it was being policed like a hostile zone. Dana, still recovering from the emotional whiplash, mentioned something that seemed small at first. One of her co-workers, nice woman named Alicia, had mentioned that the HOA president, Linda Prentice, had ties to a real estate firm called Darwin, Kane & Co. Apparently, Kane had been sniffing around Maple Hollow for months, looking to revitalize properties. The timing clicked. The fines, the pattern. Rico and I went to work, and what we found was the kind of quiet predation that hides in plain sight. Homeowners would get cited repeatedly. Lawn too long? $250, 0 cents. Fence paint fading? $800, 0 cents. A child's toy left on the porch overnight? Violation. Then, just as they reached breaking point, a buyer would appear with a below-market offer and a knowing smile. If they refused to sell, things escalated. More fines, more threats, and in at least one case, a foreclosure notice for unpaid dues that the homeowner had proof they'd already paid. This wasn't community enforcement. This was real estate chess, with fear as the opening move. It got worse. As Rico interviewed former residents, a pattern emerged, like bruises under floodlights. The most aggressive HOA enforcement happened to people who didn't want to sell. One woman, single mother, said her son's bike was vandalized 3 times. A retired couple received citations while they were in the hospital recovering from a car accident. The Jenkins family, whispers of them being pushed out, were suddenly gone one day, their house sold and flipped 3 weeks later, and in each case an anonymous email showed up around the time they resisted. Threats disguised as suggestions. Some homes just don't fit the aesthetic anymore. Time to consider what's best for your family. It was psychological warfare dressed up in garden club language. And the worst part? Most of the residents stayed quiet, because fear works better than fences. I began to understand exactly what we were up against. This wasn't just a rogue HOA. This was a slow, deliberate land grab dressed up as neighborhood management. The HOA was the muscle. The fines were the pressure points. The developer was the payoff. And families like mine? We were just obstacles. The paperwork said violation, but what it meant was get out or we'll make you wish you had. That realization sat in my chest like ice, because if it was happening to us, it had already happened to others, and we were the ones who finally pushed back. The question wasn't if there was a larger conspiracy, it was how far up the ladder it climbed. And I wasn't done climbing, not yet, because what we found next, let's just say, emails don't delete themselves, and once you see behind the curtain, you don't unsee the wires pulling the whole show. Part 4, that's where it gets dark. And personal, and public. Stay with me. The next move isn't just mine, it's everybody's. Do you ever meet someone who looks like they've been waiting years for the right person to ask the right question? That was Myra Langston, widow, 83, tidy to the point of military. Invited me in like we were old friends, but handed me a folder like it was a loaded weapon. My Emery kept records, she said. He didn't trust numbers unless he could prove who sharpened the pencil. I opened that folder expecting complaint letters and maybe a billing dispute. What I found was closer to an indictment. Emery Langston, God rest his soul, had uncovered something dirtier than grass clippings on a white fence, and somehow his HOA ledger told a story clearer than any testimony ever could. Emery had been a forensic accountant, retired, bored, too sharp to sit still. When the HOA started raising fees and writing checks with fuzzy math, he started digging. What he found? Most of the homes foreclosed over the past 3 years were flipped within months. At first glance, they looked like regular sales to different families, but Emery had cross-referenced property records, LLC registries, and city filings. They all traced back to the same nest of shell companies. And at the center? Prentice Realty Holdings. That's right, Linda Prentice, the HOA president with the charm of a retired sorority chair and the ethics of a parking boot. Her company, supposedly shuttered years ago, had quietly acquired nearly 40% of the neighborhood. The HOA wasn't protecting homes, it was bleeding them dry. I sat at Myra's kitchen table, scanning Emery's notes while Rico digitized them like he was handling ancient scrolls. And every page screamed the same thing. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a system. Violate, fine, pressure, foreclose, flip, repeat. Some of the families listed had been our neighbors, the Bakers, the Rodriguez family, the Turners. They didn't just move, they disappeared after months of battles with the HOA. And now I knew why. They'd been broken down, bled out, and shoved off their porches by a machine wrapped in legal tape. The deeper we looked, the clearer it became. Every violation wasn't just punitive, it was strategic. And people like Emery, the ones who asked too many questions? Well, now I was starting to wonder just how natural his heart attack really was. But we needed more. Paper was strong, but it wasn't fireproof. I needed their words, the kind they never expected anyone else to hear. Enter James Tran, ex-resident, HOA tech contractor, and currently running a cryptocurrency blog from a dusty apartment across town. He was the one who installed the HOA's network upgrades years ago, and, in his words, left a few doors unlocked on my way out. James was jittery, but when I told him what they did to my son, his fingers started moving across that keyboard like a man possessed. He tapped into the HOA server and pulled files like peeling back drywall in a condemned house. What we found? Digital rot, and the kind of evidence that turns legal theories into arrest warrants. The emails were cold, precise, clinical. They weren't gossiping, they were strategizing. Linda to Travis Holt, homeowner at 114 West Grove, is resisting. Recommend increased patrols, see if violations stack. Greg Thompson, the HOA's legal puppet. If they can't handle the pressure, they're not right for Maple Hollow. But the one that stopped the room cold was from Darwin Kane himself. Ellison's kid is the soft spot. Holt knows what to do. There it was, proof that Jordan's assault wasn't just violence, it was instruction. They knew who I was. They knew what Jordan meant to me. And they still decided to make an example of him. That kind of cruelty doesn't come from impulse. It comes from calculation. There were recordings, too. Monthly HOA meetings, board conversations, all confidential, of course, until James dug them out of archived folders labeled innocently as financial planning. In one clip, Linda chuckled about how folks fold faster when their kids get involved. Another had Travis joking about compliance by bruises. This wasn't just unethical. It was cartoon villainy in real time. They weren't worried about getting caught. They thought the HOA cloak would cover everything, and for a while it had. Until now. I looked at Rico. He looked at me, and we both knew we had crossed from suspicion into confirmation. That night, I sat on my porch, folder on my lap, bourbon in my hand. Jordan was asleep, still bandaged, still healing. Dana was reading in the living room, pretending not to worry. But I knew she was waiting for me to say what came next. Because once you know this much, once you hold the blueprint of abuse in your hands, you can't just sit still. You either burn it all down, or you join the silence. And I've never been good at staying quiet, especially not when they've already drawn blood. I met with James again the next morning. We backed up every file, every email, every time-stamped recording to encrypted drives. We uploaded copies to secure servers. We printed hard copies and mailed them to my former DOJ contacts under aliases. We weren't just building a case anymore, we were building a fire line. Because once the HOA got wind that we had the skeleton keys, they'd come sniffing around and we needed to be ahead of them. By miles. James looked nervous but determined. "You sure they won't trace this back to me?" he asked. I looked him in the eye. "If they try, they'll have to go through me." And for once, that wasn't bravado. It was a promise. The kind I don't make lightly. Later that week, Myra called me again. Her voice was shaking. "I found something else, Carl," she said. "Emery had a safety deposit box I didn't know about. The bank called. It's up for renewal." We met the next day, and what she brought me made everything else feel like a trailer for the real movie. Tapes. Physical tapes. Emery had recorded several closed-door HOA meetings. On one, I heard Linda say something that made my blood run cold. If Langston doesn't back off the audit, have Holt pay him a visit. Stress can be persuasive at that age. The room went quiet. Then laughter, casual, comfortable. Emery hadn't just found financial discrepancies. He caught the planning of psychological warfare, and then he died. I called Rico and said 2 words. "We're ready." He knew what I meant. The next move wasn't internal. It wasn't local. It was federal. I didn't want a slap on the wrist. I wanted indictments, prison time, RICO charges, and I wanted every resident who got forced out, every family who'd suffered, to see justice crawl right up to Linda Prentice's front porch and ring the bell in broad daylight. So if you thought the beating was the worst part, think again. That was just their opening move. This is where we flip the board. Part 5 is coming, and they have no idea what's waiting. You don't fight monsters alone. That was my first real lesson when I started digging deep into Maple Hollow's rot. The HOA wasn't just corrupt, it was fortified. But I had something they didn't. A family that wasn't afraid anymore, and a network full of people who remembered what dignity used to feel like. Dana started quietly. Teachers at her school, parents at pickup. Little conversations that started with, "Did you hear what happened to Carl's son?" and ended with, "We've had problems too." Rico reached out to his old bureau friends, retired agents who missed the chase and weren't above rattling cages in suburbia. I made house calls to neighbors who had once nodded politely at the mailbox, but now opened their doors with tears and stories. By the end of the week, we had a name, Maple United. 63 families. One purpose, no more fear. The HOA hit back the way cowards always do, loudly and without imagination. New fines rained down like bad weather. We got dinged for unapproved mailbox paint. Someone got cited for a visibly worn welcome mat, another for lawn furniture not congruent with aesthetic standards. Surveillance vans circled the block like vultures with tinted windows. 3 elderly residents got random visits from Adult Protective Services after missing HOA payments that had supposedly never arrived despite them being cashed. Our water shut off mysteriously one morning. Maintenance issue, they said. Coincidentally resolved the same day we got a $2,000 0-cents fine for disrespectful landscaping. If they were trying to intimidate us, they'd misread the room. These weren't attacks, they were confessions, and we were documenting every single one. We brought in reinforcements. Rico installed discrete cameras around our house. Every entry point, every blind spot. Meanwhile, Dana worked with local PTA members to quietly distribute our story. No names, just patterns. People responded. A retired judge named Lena Carver, who'd lived 2 streets over for 12 years, reached out. "I thought I was going crazy," she told me over coffee. "Turns out I was just being extorted." She looked through our files, our footage, and the stack of HOA letters we'd saved in a binder thicker than a phone book. "This is war," she said. "But it's also illegal. And I've got one last favor I can pull. That afternoon, she filed an emergency injunction with the county clerk. 2 days later, we had it, temporary protection from all HOA enforcement actions against coalition members. The tide had started to turn. Then Travis Holt got sloppy. I caught him on our back porch, trying the patio door with a gloved hand. He was in uniform. Like that made it better. When I stepped outside and turned on the floodlight, he froze, like a middle schooler caught stealing answers. "Routine inspection," he said. "Violation report said you had unauthorized wiring near the rear deck." I pointed to the security camera blinking over his head. "You're not a guard, Travis," I said, calm as a priest with a secret. "You're a thug in khakis. And this is an inspection. It's trespassing. Smile for the court." He left quickly, muttering something about calling his supervisor. I didn't stop him. I just made sure the footage uploaded to 3 separate encrypted drives, because the HOA was done hiding and we were done pretending we couldn't see. The final straw came from Myra again. She called late one night, her voice breathless. "Carl, I found something. You need to come over." Inside an old shoebox tucked behind Emery's war medals was a flash drive labeled Insurance. We loaded it up together. It contained a single recording, audio, poor quality, time-stamped 6 months before Emery died. I recognized the voices immediately. Linda, Gray, Travis. They were laughing about how certain residents could be persuaded to stop asking financial questions. Then came Linda's voice, clear as Judgment Day. "Heart conditions can be encouraged." I paused the recording. Myra was shaking. I squeezed her hand. "We're done," I said. "We're going to the feds." I called Agent Brianna Scott the next morning. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year, but she picked up like we were still trying cases in the same courtroom. I gave her the summary. Then I gave her the proof. Emails, audio, transactions, testimonies, a blueprint of HOA abuse dressed in bylaws and phony authority. She didn't ask for confirmation. She asked for timeline. "How fast do you want to move?" she said. I exhaled. "How fast can you authorize a warrant?" She paused. "Give me 48 hours. I hung up, walked to the kitchen, and told Dana and Jordan. "It's happening." Jordan, still on crutches, just nodded. "Good," he said. "Let's make them famous." But the HOA wasn't going down quietly. That night, I got an anonymous text. A photo of Dana leaving work. The caption read, "Nice school. Be a shame if something delayed her drive home." I showed it to Rico. He didn't flinch. "They're bluffing, but we'll tighten perimeter security." He sent 2 of his guys to shadow Dana and Jordan. We rerouted our phones, upgraded the encryption. It was surreal, living like a witness under threat because I dared to ask why a teenager got beaten over a parking space. But there was no going back, only forward. And next? Next came the public explosion. We prepped Maple United with everything they needed: paperwork, protection, statements. Lena's injunction held. The fines stopped. The water stayed on, but the neighborhood buzzed with tension like a live wire in a rainstorm. Then Samantha, our journalist contact, published the first article, front page, full spread. "When HOA power becomes abuse, a suburban nightmare." It lit up the local media like a flare in a coal mine. News vans started parking across from the HOA office. People began asking questions. And for once, nobody was buying Linda's Southern Charm routine. Her press conference flopped harder than a 4th-grade science project. And her threat of litigation for defamation, let's just say her lawyer quit the next day. Through it all, Jordan watched quietly. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it landed. One night, as we checked the camera feeds together, he said, "They thought I was weak, that hurting me would stop you." I looked at him, my son with the cast still on his arm and scars still healing, and said, "They thought wrong." He nodded. "Let's see how they handle losing." So, if you're still with me, good, because sequel is where it all breaks open. The arrests, the trial, the justice, and a few surprises nobody, not even me, saw coming. And that night, when the house was finally quiet, I stood on the porch with my coffee cooling in my hand and my heart beating a little calmer. The wind was soft, the stars steady. And for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Pride. Not just in the evidence, not just in the case, but in how we stood, in how we refused to get small when the world tried to shrink us. They came after my son, they came after our neighbors, and instead of folding, we built something stronger than fear. We built truth, the kind that doesn't knock, it kicks the door down. If that part of the story hits something in you, do us one favor, drop a comment below. Whether you're fighting an HOA, a system, or just tired of bullies in khakis pretending to be kings, this story's for you. Yet, if you believe power without accountability is just organized cowardice, and subscribe, because the next part, it's not just a trial, it's a reckoning. You won't want to miss the moment the gavel drops. Now, let's talk about what this part really teaches us. We saw what happens when ordinary people stop waiting for help and become each other's help. We learned that fighting back doesn't mean shouting louder. It means documenting, organizing, protecting, and persisting. And we were reminded that even the most well-dressed corruption still cracks when light hits it the right way. Because in the end, this isn't just a story about one family. It's about how we turn fear into fuel, how we stand taller than the fence meant to keep us small, and how justice, when done right, doesn't knock once, it knocks down every locked door, pretending to be law.